Okay, so this is our introductory notes on genetics. We're going to follow this up with a second set of notes, but this will just give you a good introduction to what genetics is all about, the things such as alleles and chromosomes and such, and how they affect the traits that we have. If any study of genetics is not complete unless you talk about the father of genetics. The father of genetics is Gregor Mendel. Gregor Mendel was a monk many years ago, and he was an Austrian monk. He lived in Austria, and he was studying this new math that had just come out, and he'd gone down to study it, and it was statistics. And when he took these classes and learned all about different ways of comparing outcomes and such in science, that he then came back and used them and tried them out where he lived at the monastery. And one of the things he would do in his spare time was grow plants. And he was very observant, and he noticed some different things about pea plants. They had a certain, only a certain few colors. They had certain leaf shapes, and so on. And it then gave him some ideas when he got to statistics, because he was a gardener and he had planted things, and he noticed that when he would cross certain plants, they would produce other types of plants, and some plants would always produce green, like green leaf plants would always produce green, yellow, and so on. He noticed that certain traits were always passed on. So he is really the father of genetics, and he gave us some ideas about how traits are passed on. Before he came up with these ideas and tested them out in his garden or up there in the monastery, scientists really didn't understand how traits were passed on. They thought it was kind of like a blending thing, where if you had like a black horse and a white horse, their offspring would be gray. But they kind of thought that, but they also noticed that when they crossed white horses and black horses, sometimes you didn't get gray. A lot of times you get white or black or maybe a mix. So it got, scientists were thinking about it, but they really didn't have a mechanism, or really couldn't understand it during his day. But he really gave new insights that were just amazing. His plants that he chose were pea plants. And the one thing he did, he would always choose something called true breeding. And that means when he chose a trait, such as green leaf, whenever he would cross them with other green leaf plants, they always produced green leaf plants. So they were called true breeding. And maybe other traits such as round seed, he would have these round seeded plants, and whenever they would cross with other round seeded plants, they would always produce round seeds. So he kind of noticed this, and he tried these things out by self-pollinating a lot of the plants. And you could do that just by taking a paintbrush and removing some of the parts where they would self-pollinate themselves. He would then take a brush and carefully choose the plants that he would pollinate. One of the things he discovered, or kind of labeled, was the idea of a trait. And he kind of called that a specific characteristic that varies among organisms. Examples of this could be eye color, hair color, height, green leaves, or whatever you want to call them, and round seeds, so on. And he called those traits. Also, in his work, he came up with some ideas about generations, because he would take these first two plants, cross them, and then he called them parental, or P, and then he would then take the offspring of those first parental group and then cross them, and he called that the first filial. And then he would take those offspring and cross them and get the second filial. And by using these parents, crossing a green and two different traits and producing another one, he was able to determine things such as dominant and recessive. And we'll check those things out in your reading as well. And during his experiments, he was able to come up with some really important ideas in genetics. These are like foundational ideas that helped drive him and other scientists in later years to really explain what's going on and how traits are passed on. One of his conclusions that he came up with is organisms contain factors that determine what trait they will pass on. Those are genes. Okay? So it's kind of the idea. He said there must be something inside of a plant or a person or a dog or a monkey or a cat that they pass on, some specific factor that they pass on to their offspring, and then those factors then determine the trait that they have. We now know today, because of many advances, that those are genes. And within genes, there's all these different forms of a gene, and we call them alleles. An example would be something like a widow's peak. So a widow's peak is like a vampire's hairline. It comes to a point. This is really exaggerated. But if you look at some people, they have this really exaggerated. Look at an old vampire. Like that. They have this hairline that's pointed, and vampires tend to have this. It's called a widow's peak. Well, there's really two possibilities. You can have a widow's peak, or you can have straight hairline, like a bowl cut. Well, a vampire wouldn't look very good with that kind of haircut, but he could have a straight hairline. So for that gene for hairline, there's widow's peak and there's straight hair. There's two possibilities. There's a lot of traits like that. Hitchhiker's thumb, it's called, where it's really your thumb is bent when you hold it. Dimples. There's a lot of different traits. Tongue rolling. They're all controlled by two alleles. You either have the alleles for one trait or the other, or you could actually have both alleles, and then one is dominant over the other. But he came up with this idea. He said all organisms contain something, he called them factors, that they pass on, and also what that they have that determines the traits that they have and that they will pass on. So if we look at the next one, a really important idea he came up with. The second one is the principle of dominance. He said in any pair of alleles that make up a gene, one allele is dominant and one allele is recessive. So it means if you put the two alleles together, one allele is dominant over the other. He noticed this because of plants that he did. So he would have green leafed, in the parental he would take a green leaf, and these are true breeding. These are ones that always produce green leaf plants. So if you take this green leaf and you cross it with another green leaf, it always produces, many generations, always produces green leaves. And then you cross it with a yellow leaf plant. In the parental generation, we would then get every plant that was produced would be green-leaved plants. Okay? And he looked at that and he thought, you know what? That must mean that green leaves are dominant over yellow. And he called that dominance. And came up with this idea, the principle of dominance. So in any pair of alleles, one allele is dominant and one allele is recessive. Very important idea. So if we keep going here, I'm going to erase this stuff and go to the next page. Okay. But he also asked himself this: where did the other traits go? Were they lost? So he had this green leaf plant, and so green leaf, crossed it with the yellow leaf, he produced green leaves. He's wondering, well, what happened to the yellow leaves? Are they still there? How could he figure it out? Well, what he did was he took two of these F1 generations and he crossed them to see what would happen. And guess what happened? He got some green leafed plants and he got yellow leafed plants. Okay? So he noticed when he could control all of this, he would self-pollinate them. He would only let these green leaf plants cross, and he would always get this, the F1 generation would always produce when they were crossed, some green leaves, plants, and some yellow. And he said, they must carry the traits. So that's where he came up with the idea of alleles. Like, there's some factor, and that factor can actually be hidden. It can be carried, like a carrier, not expressed, but then in another generation, when the right things happen, it's expressed again. Okay. So that was another idea to get up with. And the last one here we're going to talk about is segregation. This one, he was kind of right on, and he was kind of wrong. But this is generally true for some things, but not always true. But we always learn about it. And it's called segregation. This idea is the idea is that alleles are separated during formation of a gamete. So it's kind of the idea, if you have a widow's peak, and you have dimples, two traits, and you're going to pass them on to your offspring, that your chance of getting widow's peak doesn't have anything to do with dimples. They're separate. They're segregated, separate from each other. They're segregated. Just like they used to do in the 60s, separate races. This is saying traits are segregated or separated. Now sometimes that's true. It really has a lot to do with where it is on the chromosome. But sometimes it's not true. The closer they are together on the chromosome, they actually are linked. And you can see it's really obvious in something fruit fly experiments where eye color and some other things, wing type, are actually connected. Like if you have a certain eye color, you will have a certain wing type, and they're connected. But Mendel originally thought they weren't. Okay, and he also came up with some other ideas that I don't have typed up here. But the idea of a gamete, that something is produced by an individual, and then that unit then passes on all of your genetic information to your offspring. And we know that's a gamete, or a cell used for reproduction. And kind of interesting thing, a gamete, for example, in humans, is 23 chromosomes. And if you think about it, we have a total of 46. And a gamete, so males produce sperm, females produce eggs. A gamete has 23 chromosomes, and the reason that is, we need 46, but the reason that is an egg has 23, and sperm has 23. So when they come together, you get 46 chromosomes, just what you need. And the reason why this is really important is it kind of explains, like if you look at some people, they look just like one parent or the other. And really it depends on what allele the parent gives them. And how that works is the egg and the sperm, they each give one allele for each trait. So for widow's peak, you get one allele from your mother, one allele from your father, and that then determines what trait you will have. Okay? So depending on the traits you get from your father, they may be dominant over the ones your mother gives you, so you may look a lot like your father. And there's some really interesting traits that get passed on that way. Baldness is a really interesting one, because most people think, look at your father, and you can tell whether you're going to be bald or not, but that doesn't have anything to do with it, because in humans, to determine the sex you will be, you're either XX, which is a female, or XY, which is a male. Okay. So, and if you're a female, you can only give an X to your child. And the one that determines whether you're going to have a male or female is the male. He either gives the X or the Y. Whichever one he gives determines the sex. So if he gives an X, it's a female, the child they're going to have. If he gives a Y, it's a male. And the only place that carries the gene for baldness is on an X. So if you're a male and you're bald, it's because you got it from your mother. And if you want to know if you're going to be bald or whatever, look at your mother's father. That'll give you an idea of the likelihood of that. But all these ideas were put forth by Gregor Mendel. Make sure you're doing your readings, though, to read more about this. Check out the other notes I've included from Khan Academy. It's all really good stuff. It'll help you really understand what you need to know. And if you have any questions, shoot me an email, let me know somehow. You can even call me at school if you need to, and let me know if you have any questions. And that'll be it for our intro notes to genetics.